As most of you know, over the last few weeks, I have become very interested, possibly obsessed, by artificial intelligence, and particularly on how we in the Church should react to this all-pervading presence and influence in our everyday world. Along with many others from all sorts of different backgrounds, I have very much welcomed Pope Leo's first encyclical, his letter to the Church, Magnificat Humanitas, with its subtitle, On Safeguarding the Human Person in the Time of Artificial Intelligence. On Saturday, 11th of July, in the morning, St. Gregory's is hosting a meeting on the Church and AI. And I very much hope that as many of you as possible will be able to attend. Much of the first part of the Pope's letter presents a summary of the Church's social teaching throughout the centuries, and particularly the teaching of the popes since the end of the 19th century. At the heart of this teaching is the dignity and value of the human person. Pope Leo, like all his predecessors, gives great emphasis to the idea that proper regard for the human person has to be at the centre of any legislation or social arrangement which arises from technological developments or other changes in society. We have just heard in the Gospel, "Are not two sparrows sold for a penny, and not one of them will fall to the ground without your Father knowing? But even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows." Jesus makes the point about human individual dignity so well. 2,000 years of reflection on this image of the sparrows and the hairs of our head, and the continuing teaching of the Church could not come up with a more telling way of making the point. You are special. And you. And you. In fact, not just special, but unique. It's a mind-blowing idea, but at the risk of hurting our brains, we should give it some serious consideration. Of course, none of us is at the centre of the universe, although we might be able to think of people who suspect that they are. But each of us has an immortal soul, created uniquely by God. It's good that we can point, we believe that, but it's good that we can point to undisputed facts to back up this belief. Each of us has unique fingerprints and a unique set of genes making up our DNA. One way in which I used to think that, this is a confession now, one way in which I used to think that I was at the centre of the universe, or perhaps in my own little world, which is not quite the same thing, was an experience I often had if I left the cosy, sheltered world of the Abbey cloister and ventured up to London, the big city. I would find myself almost overwhelmed to think that all the people, thousands of them, I walked past on the street, had lives as complicated, multifaceted, and probably messy as my own. And that a spider's web of connections could be plotted from each one of those individuals. It seemed to hit me particularly if I crossed a bridge over the Thames in London. It always seemed to be the case that I was going in one direction and everybody else was coming in the other direction. It was quite uncanny. I have learned only recently from a parishioner that there is a word for this experience, sonder, S-O-N-D-E-R. It was made up by someone in 2012 in a guy called John Koenig, a book with a wonderful title of The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. He defined it as the awareness that everyone around you is the main character of their own story, but to you, they're just extras in the background. Has anybody else had this experience? So now you've got a word for it, sonder. As believers, we would like to put it differently, that God loves each of us unconditionally as his own son or daughter, and that we must make all are moral decisions, whether they concern age-old questions like the care of the young or the old, the welcome of strangers, the beginning or end of life. All of these concerns have to be based on that simple truth, the unique dignity of the human person. In fact, the first talk in the meeting we have on the 11th of July will be given by a visiting philosopher, theologian from Oxford, dealing with this point. His title is The Perennial Dignity of the Human Person. I have a few copies left of the encyclical, available for anyone who would like to read what the Pope has to say before that meeting. It is also available on the Vatican website. It's quite a long document, but I think it's beautifully written, and it addresses the whole subject of artificial intelligence in the context of Catholic social teaching. I'm sure you'll find it worthwhile. And just so you don't increase my experience of Sonder, please come on July the 11th, so I'm not the only one here.